unstoppable storm, crushing any resistance in their path. Every new species they encountered fell within days, their primitive defenses no match for the Velkir's advanced technology. When the time came to invade Earth, the High Council barely considered it a challenge. General Zorak stood in the command center of the Velkir flagship, Dreadfang, staring at the holographic display of Earth, a blue and green world teeming with life. Yet its defenses were laughable. There were no planetary shields, no massive war fleets, no orbital stations bristling with cannons, just a few scattered satellites and primitive space stations. The humans were still using combustion-based weaponry. It was almost insulting. Zorak turned to his advisors, his mandibles clicking in amusement. This will be a swift conquest. Deploy the probes. Let's confirm their weakness. Hundreds of cloaked probes were launched from the Velkir fleet, descending silently into Earth's atmosphere. Their mission was simple: scan human cities, analyze their technology, and locate strategic military targets. One by one, the probes reached their designated locations, activating their stealth systems to avoid detection. They slipped through the skies unseen, transmitting valuable data back to Dreadfang. The initial reports were exactly as expected. The humans were disorganized. They had multiple governments, each with its own armies and strategies. There was no united planetary defense force. Their military relied on outdated projectile-based weapons. A few nuclear warheads existed, but they were decades old and posed no real threat to the Velkir fleet. Zorak chuckled. Just as I thought. Primitive. Then something changed. One of the probe signals suddenly vanished. Then another, and another. The command center grew tense as Velkir technicians frantically searched for the missing probes. The machines hadn't sent distress signals. They hadn't been destroyed by weapons. They had simply disappeared. Zorak's amusement faded. Where are they going? The lead technician hesitated. Unknown, General. There is no wreckage, no energy signatures. It's as if they never existed. Zorak narrowed his eyes. He had seen countless planetary invasions, and this was different. He turned to his fleet commander. Deploy a scout ship. I want eyes on the ground. A sleek Velkir scout vessel, equipped with advanced cloaking technology, descended toward Earth. The pilot maintained radio silence, weaving through the planet's atmosphere undetected. The ship hovered over one of the last known locations of the missing probes, a dense city filled with towering skyscrapers. The pilot engaged the ship's scanners, searching for any trace of the lost machines. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the ship's warning lights flashed red. The cloaking system failed. The pilot's mandibles clicked in confusion as he tried to re-engage it, but the controls were unresponsive. The ship's power systems flickered, and then darkness. The engine shut down. The scout vessel began to fall. Panic set in as the pilot desperately tried to send a distress signal. But before he could react, something struck the ship. An invisible force, faster than anything the Velkir had ever seen. The last thing the pilot saw before his vessel exploded was a glimpse of a humanoid figure standing on a rooftop, holding what looked like a railgun. The command center aboard Dreadfang went silent. The scout ship was gone. No explosion was detected. No wreckage appeared on their scanners. It was as if the ship had never existed. Zorak clenched his fists. This is no coincidence. Something is hunting us. A transmission suddenly cut through the command center. It was audio, garbled, distorted. A deep voice spoke in the Velkir tongue. "We see you." A cold chill ran through the Velkir officers. How was this possible? No species had ever detected their cloaked scouts before, and yet the humans were not only aware of their presence, they were waiting for them. Zorak turned to his war council. Initiate the invasion. Now. The fleet descended. Warships the size of cities moved into attack formation. Velkir troops prepared for a swift planetary strike. But deep in his mind, Zorak couldn't shake a feeling he had never experienced before. And with precision, warships descended through Earth's atmosphere, dark shadows blotting out the sun. Their landing crafts broke through the clouds, touching down in major cities across the planet. Velker shock troopers, clad in heavy armor and equipped with plasma rifles, spread out in formation. Their orders were clear: eliminate resistance, establish control, and prepare Earth for occupation. General Zorak observed the invasion from the command center aboard Dreadfang, his 6 eyes scanning the battlefield reports. Everything was proceeding as expected. No anti-aircraft fire, no coordinated military response, just panic. Humans ran in the streets, trying to flee. Their primitive vehicles were useless against the Velker's energy disruptors. The conquest of Earth would be over in hours. Then, the first squad went silent. Zorak's mandibles twitched in irritation. Report. No response. Another squad vanished. Then another. The red blips on the war map, marking Velker ground forces, were disappearing one by one. There were no distress signals, no cries for help, just silence. Confusion spread through the command center. This was not how invasions worked. The Velker had faced resistance before, but never like this. On the ground, Velker soldiers moved cautiously through the empty streets. The cities were too quiet, too still. A squad leader signaled his team to advance, sweeping their rifles from side to side. Their thermal scanners picked up nothing. Their motion sensors detected nothing. It was as if the city was abandoned. Then, a flicker of movement. A shadow shifted on a rooftop. A sharp crack split the air. The squad leader's head snapped back, his helmet shattering as a high-velocity round punched through his skull. The other Velker barely had time to react before the air filled with more gunfire. Soldiers fell in seconds, their armor useless against weapons specifically designed to pierce it. The survivors dove for cover, but the attack didn't stop. Their own weapons suddenly powered down, displays flashing error codes. EMP attack. Their plasma rifles were dead. Their comms were jammed. They were blind, deaf, and unarmed. The last surviving soldier activated his distress beacon. He tried to retreat, running toward the extraction point. Just as he reached the landing zone, his own dropship exploded. A missile, fired from an unseen position, turned it into a fireball. Before he could process what was happening, something grabbed him from behind. A gloved hand covered his mouth. A cold, mechanical voice whispered in his ear, "You're in our world now." The last thing he saw was darkness. Zorak watched in disbelief as the invasion force collapsed. Reports flooded in from all over the planet. Velker units were being slaughtered. The humans weren't fighting like any species the Velker had ever encountered. They weren't meeting their enemies in open battle. They weren't relying on brute strength or advanced technology. They were hunting them. The command center was filled with frantic voices. Velker officers shouted over one another, desperate for answers. How were the humans doing this? They had no interstellar military, no advanced weapons, no known defenses that could counter Velker technology. And yet, the Velker were losing. Zorak turned to his fleet commander. Deploy reinforcements. Increase airstrikes. Burn their cities if you have to. The order was given. Velker warships adjusted their formations, unleashing plasma bombardments onto major population centers. Fires erupted across the cities. Buildings collapsed. Smoke rose into the sky. The humans were outmatched. The Velker were stronger, faster, and technologically superior. And yet, the attacks did nothing. Through the smoke and fire, human forces emerged unharmed. Entire squads moved like ghosts, untouched by the bombardment. Their armor blended into the environment, adaptive cloaking suits rendering them nearly invisible. Their weapons, far more advanced than previously thought, cut through Velker defenses like paper. The Velker had walked into a trap. Aboard Dreadfang, alarms blared. An urgent transmission came through from their own fleet. "We have intruders." Zorak's eyes widened. Intruders? That was impossible. The Valkyr fleet was in high orbit, far beyond human technology's reach. No species had ever infiltrated a Valkyr warship. Their security systems were impenetrable. And yet, as Zorak turned toward the ship's internal sensors, he saw the truth. Human operatives were already aboard. Warships. Black-clad figures moved through the shadows, striking with brutal efficiency. Their weapons fired silent energy pulses, disrupting Valkyr armor and killing with precision. Their tactics were ruthless, cutting off power, sealing doors, hacking into control systems. One human agent placed a small device onto a terminal. Within seconds, the ship's lights flickered. Systems crashed. The Valkyr fleet's main navigation controls went offline. Zorak's rage turned to something he had never felt before: fear. He activated the emergency beacon, calling for the fleet to retreat. But nothing happened. The humans had taken control. A message appeared on the main display screen of Dreadfang. It was written in perfect Valkyr script. "You should have left us alone." Then, the ship's gravity failed. The Valkyr command center plunged into chaos as the ship's artificial gravity system was hacked. Officers floated helplessly as alarms blared. Emergency lights flickered. The ship trembled. Zorak realized, with a sinking feeling, that he was no longer the hunter. The humans had turned the war into a slaughter. Zorak struggled to regain control of his ship. The command center was in chaos. Officers floating in zero gravity, emergency sirens wailing, screens flashing red warnings. Unauthorized access detected. System override in progress. The words glowed in bright Valkyr script across every console. His claws slammed into the control panel, trying to shut down the intrusion. Nothing responded. A deep voice echoed through the speakers. "Control has been transferred. Your ship belongs to us now." Zorak's mandibles clenched. The humans had done the impossible. They had hijacked a Valkyr battleship. On board the Valkyr fleet, the situation was spiraling out of control. Reports came in of warships losing navigation, weapons systems failing, and internal defenses turning against them. Entire squads of Valkyr soldiers were being locked inside their own barracks, airlocks opening into the void of space. The humans weren't just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with something far deadlier: their minds. On Earth, the ground war had shifted into full chaos. Valkyr soldiers were still trying to regroup, but every attempt was met with failure. Their own mechs, once the backbone of their ground forces, had turned against them. The machines twitched, their systems overridden by a foreign eye. One Valkyr war mech suddenly pivoted mid-stride, raised its plasma cannon, and fired into its own ranks. The surviving soldiers screamed in confusion. "What is happening?" Another war mech stomped forward, crushing its own squad beneath massive metal feet. More mechs followed, their weapons turning on their Valkyr masters. Somewhere, hidden deep within the human defenses, an elite cyber warfare unit controlled it all. Bonner, a veteran operative, stood in front of a massive holographic display, his fingers dancing over a keyboard. Code streamed across the screen, breaking into the Valkyr's encrypted systems with ease. His team, a squad of elite hackers and AI specialists, worked in synchronized silence. One of his techs grinned. "We're in their network. We own them." Bonner didn't smile. "Then let's make sure they feel it." On Dreadfang, Zorak watched in horror as his warships turned against one another. A Valkyr destroyer, its weapons now under human control, unleashed a barrage of plasma fire into a nearby cruiser. Explosions rocked the fleet. The cruiser, unable to react, shattered into a ball of fire. Another ship fired its thrusters in the wrong direction, colliding into a neighboring battleship. The two vessels spun helplessly, crashing into a third. The once mighty fleet was destroying itself. Zorak's claws dug into the console. This was not a war. This was extermination. On the ground, the Velkers' last defensive lines crumbled. Their communications had been hijacked. Their energy weapons had been rendered useless by human electromagnetic pulses. Their mechs and drones were no longer under their control. The entire battlefield belonged to the humans. His remaining forces in an underground bunker. His soldiers, terrified and demoralized, listened as he roared into the emergency comms. "Fight back. We still outnumber them. We can still." His words cut off as the bunker door slid open. A single human operative walked in. His armor flickered, the cloaking field deactivating as he stepped forward. In his hands, he held a sleek, black rifle, one unlike anything the Velker had ever seen. The warlord snarled, raising his plasma blade. "Die, human." The human fired. A single, silent shot. The warlord's body froze. His eyes widened as he looked down. His armor had been pierced, not by a plasma bolt, but by something far worse. A nanite-infused round had entered his bloodstream. The microscopic machines inside it were already tearing him apart from the inside. He collapsed, his body breaking down on a molecular level. The human soldier looked at the rest of the Velker troops. Surrender. The remaining soldiers dropped their weapons. Back in orbit, the last functioning Velkir warships received a desperate order from their high command. Retreat. But retreat was no longer an option. The humans had seized control of the Velkir jump gate system. Every single escape route had been blocked. One by one, the remaining Velkir warships went dark. Their power drained, their systems hacked, their commanders executed. Some tried to self-destruct, but the humans had locked them out of that too. Zorak, floating helplessly in the command center of Dreadfang, finally understood. The humans had never been the prey. They had always been the hunters. The battlefield was quiet. The echoes of war had faded, leaving only smoke, fire, and the distant hum of human war machines securing the final zones. Earth had won, but victory had come at a price. Bonner stood on a ruined highway, his armor streaked with blood. Some of it Velker, some of it human. The city around him was barely standing. Skyscrapers lay in ruins, their shattered glass reflecting the flames below. Vehicles burned in the streets, their twisted metal shells evidence of the battle that had raged here only hours ago. The war was over, but the dead still lay where they had fallen. Bonner's radio crackled. "Bonner, you there?" He pressed a bloodied hand to his earpiece, still breathing. The voice on the other end was strained. "We need you at the evac zone. It's bad." Bonner closed his eyes. It was always bad. He moved through the streets, stepping over bodies, Velkir and human alike. A Velkir soldier, still gripping a broken rifle, lay slumped against a wall, his lifeless eyes staring at the sky. Bonner had seen the same empty stare on too many of his own men. The evac zone was a mess. Medics moved frantically between makeshift tents, treating the wounded as best they could. Some injuries were survivable. Others weren't. Bonner stopped when he saw her. Lieutenant Sarah Cade, one of the best snipers in his unit, lay on a stretcher. Her breathing was shallow, her uniform soaked in red. A medic pressed down on a wound in her stomach, but the look on his face told Bonner everything. She wasn't going to make it. Bonner knelt beside her. Her eyes fluttered open. She tried to smile. "Took you long enough," she whispered. Bonner swallowed hard. "You did good, Cade." Her fingers weakly gripped his wrist. "Did we win?" Bonner nodded. "Yeah, we won." Sarah let out a shaky breath. Then it was worth it. Her grip loosened. Her eyes lost focus. Bonner didn't move. He didn't speak. He just sat there as another name was added to the cost of victory. A medic gently pulled him away. "I'm sorry." Bonner said nothing. In the distance, other soldiers carried their wounded, their dead. Some wept. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. The war had taken many. Some had been soldiers. Some had been civilians caught in the crossfire. But all of them had paid the price. Across the ruined battlefield, the last of the Valkyr prisoners were being rounded up. Some had surrendered willingly, others had fought until the very end. General Zorak was among them. The once mighty commander of the Valkyr invasion knelt in the dirt, his arms bound, his mandibles twitching in pain. His armor was dented and scorched, his pride shattered. He had led countless conquests. A human officer approached him. "You underestimated us." Zorak lifted his head. His voice was hoarse, broken. "What are you?" The officer stared at him for a long moment before speaking. "Survivors." The war was over. The battle had been won. But the cost of victory would never be forgotten. The void of space was silent. But silence did not mean peace. High above Earth, the last remnants of the Valkyr fleet drifted in chaos. Fires raged inside shattered warships, debris floating like jagged stars. Some vessels were still intact, their commanders desperately trying to escape, but the humans had taken control of the jump gate system. There was nowhere to run. Aboard Dreadfang, the once mighty Valkyr flagship, General Zorak sat in chains. His 6 eyes stared at the holographic display in front of him, an image of the Valkyr fleet being torn apart. He had never seen such devastation. His forces had been systematically dismantled, their own technology used against them. The humans had done this. Zorak looked up at the human officer standing before him, Commander Reynolds, a man whose expression was unreadable, whose soldiers fought without mercy, without fear. Zorak's mandibles clicked. "If you destroy us all, the Empire will retaliate." Reynolds stared at him. "Good." The transmission was sent, a message broadcast across the stars. The Valkyr Empire, spanning countless worlds, had never known defeat. The Valkyr had conquered without resistance, had crushed civilizations beneath their boots. But now, for the first time in their history, they received a message they were never prepared to hear. The message was simple. Earth is not yours. If you come again, we will burn your worlds. The word spread like wildfire. Across the Empire, Valkyr leaders watched the footage of their fleet crumbling, their warriors slaughtered. The fear that spread through their ranks was unlike anything before. And then, the final blow. From Dreadfang, the humans activated the stolen Valkyr fleet's command system. One by one, the remaining warships were hijacked, their navigation locked, their engines forced into overdrive. Zorak's eyes widened in horror. "No, you wouldn't." The human officer leaned closer. "You started this war. We're going to finish it." The stolen Valkyr warships turned toward the Empire's core worlds. One by one, they jumped into hyperspace, on a collision course with Valkyr strongholds. The Empire trembled. The stolen Valkyr warships emerged from hyperspace above the heart of the Empire. Once, these ships had been symbols of dominance, unstoppable weapons that had crushed countless civilizations. But now, they carried a different message. On the capital world of Valkyra, panic spread through the Imperial command centers. Alarms blared. Tactical officers shouted over one another, their mandibles clicking in fear. The stolen warships, still bearing Valkyr insignias, were heading straight for the planet. Admiral Vorshak, the highest-ranking military leader of the Valkyr Empire, stood frozen as the massive holographic display in front of him showed the impossible. "Whose fleet is that?" he barked. A trembling officer replied, It's ours, sir. But the humans control it." Vorshak's breath came in short, panicked gasps. The war had begun as a simple conquest, a routine invasion of an insignificant world. How had it come to this? The humans had not just won. They had turned the Empire's own weapons against them. A deep, unnatural voice crackled over the Imperial communication channels. It was a human transmission. "This is Commander Reynolds of Earth. You will listen." The entire command chamber fell silent. Across Valkyra, military officials, ruling elites, and civilians tuned in to the broadcast. "You thought we were weak. You believed we would kneel. But you have learned the truth. We do not bow. We do not surrender. We survive. We fight. And we win. Your fleet is gone. Your strongest warriors are dead. And now, your own warships sit above your homeworld, under our control. We could reduce your cities to dust. We could wipe Velkera from the stars. But we won't. Because we are not like you. A single Velkir ship enters human space again. We will not stop at your armies. We will not stop at your leaders. We will end your empire. Completely. There will be no second warning. The transmission ended. Above Velkera, the stolen warships did not fire. They did not launch an attack. They simply turned, one by one, and jumped back into hyperspace. It was not an act of mercy. It was a message. The Empire had been given a choice. Stay away from Earth, or be destroyed. Vorshak slumped into his command chair, his claws shaking. He knew the truth. The Velkir were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. And this time, the humans would be watching.